This video is sponsored by Card Kingdom. You can visit their store by using my referral link in the description below. Hi everyone, I'm Nizzanotes, and today is Saturday, and that means it's time for another edition of Nizzanotes, my weekly vlog series, where I talk about limited magic. So it's still New Capenna season and all that. I mean, that's the format that's available on Arena, but, as I've been saying, the format isn't the greatest one in terms of replay value. I've drafted it like 50 plus times, got to Mythic, and I'm not super motivated to draft it a bunch more. I'll be streaming a couple more weekends of the format, one day of the weekend, like Saturday or whatever, but that's about it. It seems like there's a long time till the next set, but there's actually not if you play on Arena, because we have Alchemy Horizons, Baldur's Gate coming out pretty soon, and it's a full-blown limited format, and I'm interested to see what that looks like. Because it's a digital only limited format, which isn't really something we've seen before with digital only cards anyway. I guess cubes have had them, but you know what I mean. It's a different sort of thing because it's a real set release. But the point is, we'll be talking about that format before long, and to sort of fill the gap for a few more weeks. Until then, I'm just going to do some more general videos like I did last week, where I talked about 5 ways to deal with frustration in Magic, especially limited Magic. And this week I want to talk about 10 build-arounds, limited build-arounds from the game's history that I think are the coolest or most fun or most powerful, kind of a combination of those things. Build-arounds are pretty cool, and I think that's kind of one of the problems with Streets of New Capenna. Most sets have like a build-around or two that let you build these like really interesting decks. Like they have them at common and uncommon, and if you get a few of them, you can do something wacky. So I thought talking about build-arounds in particular would be, sort of does, I guess, connect to Capenna, because I was inspired to make it because this format has no such things that are actually viable. There might be a few rares or mythics, but you know what I mean, none at the lower rarities. So in this video, we're going to talk about 10 of those build-arounds from the game's past that are a lot of fun. What I mean by build around, if you don't know, is a card that is in a vacuum, not very good and limited, but generally can become an incredibly powerful win condition or engine if you successfully build around it in limited. So let's go ahead and jump right into our list. All right, so number 10, I have Dovans Acuity, and this also goes hand in hand with Clear the Mind. These are both cards from Ravnica Allegiance that, if you look at them in a lot of limited formats, like for example, imagine these cards in New Capenna, they wouldn't really work out. Like Dovans Acuity is a cool engine where if you play an instant spell during your main phase, you can return it to your hand, and every time it enters, you gain 2 life and draw a card. And it turns out that in that format, just slamming instants in your main phase to get Dovans Acuity going was well worth it. The life you gained helped you survive long enough to take advantage of the cards you drew, and you just had access to so much mana that you could do some really silly things. And then ultimately, these decks, as painful as it was to play against, perhaps, these decks could win the game simply by cycling, not the mechanic cycling, but casting Clear the Mind and having a Clear the Mind in the graveyard, shuffling a Clear the Mind into their library, and just, keep doing that, keep gaining life, keep drawing cards, keep not dying, and eventually your opponent mills out. So this is one of the really sweet, like, sort of control build-arounds that we've seen in the past, this Ravnica Allegiance card. You can include Clear the Mind. You didn't have to have it for the Acuity to be great, but they're both kind of build-arounds that look pretty bad in a vacuum, but in fact are pretty amazing cards in that limited format. At number 9, I've got Burning Vengeance. It's from Original Innistrad, and it is a flashback build-around. Every time you flash a card back, it's actually more generally cast a spell from your graveyard, but in this limited format, that generally meant flashing things back. You get to do 2 to any target. So flashback is already a pretty powerful mechanic that gives you card advantage. You sometimes spend more mana to flash the card back, or you spend a lot to cast it in the first place. So you're not getting the best mana value always from flashback cards. I mean, there's exceptions like Lingering Souls, but most of them, you're not getting the greatest value, but you do get 2 full cards out of them most of the time because of flashback. And we've seen a lot of mechanics like that recently, where the additional card of value you could get out of it is kind of expensive. Like think about Adventure, for example, in Eldraine, and things like that, where, the card may not seem efficient mana-wise, but the full package you're getting is actually pretty powerful. But the point about all this is that Burning Vengeance makes it so that's no longer true, and it also makes just flashing spells back from your graveyard a potential win condition, because you can turn every spell you flash back into a shock, which you can use to kill creatures, you can use to threaten your opponent's life total, and oh, by the way, you're also getting another big effect every time you're flashing these back, and you could really build a legit flashback deck in the various Innistrad limited formats, and there was just a lot of it around, and Burning Vengeance was an incredibly powerful build around. Interestingly, as we'll see, this list has several from the various Innistrad block sets, the Innistrad, I guess not blocks, but the Innistrad sets do feature somewhat prominently on this video. I guess that's a plane where we get a lot of sweet build-arounds. All right, at number 8, I have Dampen Thought. Now, this was a wacky one in Original Champions of Kamigawa. I don't know why I said Original Champions. I said the whole name, but Champions of Kamigawa, which is one of the original Kamigawa sets. And it's a mill card. And if you know me, you know, a lot of limited formats don't have viable mill strategies. You know, New Capenna doesn't. Most don't. But some do, and there's usually, you know, when it does work out, it's usually that there's a mill build around. And I could have thought of some more mill things to include on here, like, you know, Teferi's tutelage and stuff were pretty sweet mill build arounds. But ultimately, if I wanted to go with a mill build around, I think this one's the wackiest and the most fun, because it involves this card, Dampen Thought, from Champions of Kamigawa, as I said, which is an arcane spell that you can splice onto arcane spells. And what that means is every other spell you have that says arcane on it, and there were a lot of them in this format, you could pay 2 and add this effect to it. So yes, it's an uncommon, but you could get like 1 copy of this and just start stapling it to all your arcane spells. And in limited, when you don't have a very big deck to begin with, I mean, the game starts out, you've drawn your 7 cards and you have 33 in your deck. Dampen Thought being spliced over and over again was a very real win condition in that format. They also brought it back in Modern Masters as a common, where it was once again a pretty viable win condition. And at common, you know, you could just end up with a bunch of Dampen Thoughts, period, and have that sort of be your win condition. But, you know, you could also splice. And the splicing is, you know, it's a cool Kamigawa-specific mechanic, too, that is not one you get to play with a whole lot in most forms of Magic. But in this limited format, it was pretty legit, especially with something like Dampen Thought. All right, next up, I have Vent Sentinel. So this is from Rise of the Eldrazi originally, and I wasn't playing Magic. I played Magic from about Urza's Saga to the beginning, like the first set of Alara, like right when that was being previewed is when I stopped playing for a while. And then I started playing again around Theros. So I missed, you know, 4 or 5 years of Magic. And this was one of the sets I missed, which is sad because it's one of the greatest limited formats, according to most. I have had chances to play it because it's available on Magic Online sometimes and stuff like that. And so, you know, I have experience with the set, not as much as I would like, but even with my limited experience, I had a lot of fun with the Defenders Matter deck, which is a pretty cool thing to do, you know, because Defenders are usually, you know, they don't matter, but there are a bunch of sweet Defender payoffs in the set. And ultimately, Rise of the Eldrazi, or rather, Vent Sentinel, is from Rise of the Eldrazi, is the win condition for that deck. As you can see, you can pay 2 and tap it and just start hitting players for the number of creatures with Defender you control. Wasn't that hard to just fill your deck with Defenders and just go after your opponent with this. This format was a wacky one because it was one of the slowest formats we've seen. And you could basically, like, 2 drops weren't worth playing. They weren't worth the card in this format. So this sort of Defender-centric strategy actually worked. And so it was a weird time for a limited format, but Vent Sentinel is very cool. I did also get to play with it again in Iconic Masters once that came out, and you know, they had the Defenders Matter theme there as well, and it was still pretty sweet. So, you know, cool, unique mechanic or theme, this Defender thing, and Vent Sentinel is sort of the ultimate build around for that deck, the one that you need. If you don't get Vent Sentinel, the deck's kind of bad. So you kind of need the Vent Sentinel for it to succeed, and that's what really makes it into a build around. And just like that, Vent Sentinel's not good in any other deck. It's only good once you get there on all the Defenders. So yeah. Next up, I've got Secret Plans from Khans of Tarkir. Khans of Tarkir was a great limited format. You know, I think the only other format over the last, like, the Khans of Tarkir came out in like 2014, I want to say. The only format since then that I think is really in competition with it as one of the all-time greats is probably Dominaria. So if you've played more recently and played Dominaria, Khans is better or as good as that. And Morph is part of what makes that set really good. It's sort of a smoothing mechanic because all of your creatures, not all of them, but many of your creatures can be played for 3 mana, which sort of smooths out mana problems for you. And then, of course, Morph creatures you can turn face up for a mana cost and you get some value. And Secret Plans was an amazing Morph build around. You know, it made them all into 2/3s instead of 2/2s. And then when they turned face up, you could draw a card. And you could just jam a bunch of Morph creatures into your deck and be like a 5-color deck splashing a bunch of colors, because the Morph itself is fairly it's colorless. So having the ability to turn them face up is important, but you could just splash mana to make it happen and be a blue-green base deck and be able to flip these things up from time to time. And when you did, you got serious value. And it was just a very real way to grind out value in this format with a bunch of Morph creatures. And because Morph was basically my favorite thing about the format, it makes sense that I really enjoyed building around Secret Plans. I actually might have... So no, I probably don't actually. So I started doing draft videos in the set after Khans, Fate Reforged, when it became a lot harder to build around Secret Plans because you had fewer packs of Khans. So I don't think I actually have a draft video of this one. For some of these I might though, so check out the description. I might try to dredge up some old draft videos of me using some of these. I didn't think about it till just now. There might be one of Secret Plans, and I know there's one of a couple of these. So check out the description, and you might find some of the most of these are old draft videos of me playing with some of these wacky build-arounds. At number 5, I have Ulvin Wild Mysteries. This is another card from Shadows over Innistrad. One of the great mechanics in that set was clues. This is another mechanic that sort of smoothed things out because you had these artifact tokens around that you could sacrifice for a card. And so, you know, it's kind of like blood tokens or cycling, mechanics like that we've seen recently, or connive, I guess. But Ulvin Wild Mysteries is really sweet because it combines with Investigate, which makes clues, and you generate a 1/1 soldier every time you sacrifice a clue. And when a non-token creature you control dies, you make a clue. So you end up with insane value being generated by this card if you have enough creatures in your deck. And you can really go off. You don't lose. You know, losing a creature is sort of like it says, pay 2 mana, draw a card, and make a 1/1 when this creature dies. And it's even better than that because you can pay the 2 mana at any time to get that 1/1. So yeah, Ulvin Wild Mysteries, really sweet. Involves one of my favorite mechanics ever, really. And it was really powerful. All right, next up we've got Crawling Sensation. This is an example of one that I know there's a video of somewhere. It's from Shadows over Innistrad. There's probably multiple videos of it. And it is a really sweet self-mill card. Self-mill, when it works out, is just such a sweet value way to do things. And the format of Shadows over Innistrad had Delirium as a mechanic, which wanted you to get cards of 4 different types in your graveyard. And when you did, you got some sort of bonus on various cards. And some of these were quite big bonuses. So milling yourself already had inherent value. But what made Crawling Sensation really great is that when a land gets put into your graveyard from anywhere the first time, you get an insect token too. So you could mill yourself while adding to the board. You generally did. You know, every time you milled yourself, maybe not every time, but most of the time you got a 1/1. Lands could also go to the graveyard in different ways, and you could get the 1/1, which was sweet. And so you're like loading up your graveyard, generating all of this value, and actually adding to the board. And this just turns into an insane value engine in triple Shadows over Innistrad. And it is, you know, a pretty sweet build around for that reason. Just really worked, was really powerful in this limited format. If you ended up with, you know, all the graveyard payoffs to make it worth milling yourself with Crawling Sensation in the first place. And at number 3, I have Companions. You know, it's interesting. The way I think about Ikoria is strange, I think, because I think it was a bad limited format because, especially before Companions got nerfed, like 8 of the 10 Companions were so good that you just always took them and met their requirements regardless of how harsh it seemed, and you did really well. This is because you could just start the game with a companion basically in your hand, except better than in your hand because your opponent couldn't make you discard it, sort of in its own companion zone, sort of like a commander zone, and then you just cast it directly from there and it comes into play. And most of them are crazy powerful. Yes, maybe you have to not play any odd or even numbered cards or silly things like those. But when you put one of the best cards in your deck in your opening hand, and it also, by the way, happens to synergize really well with everything your deck is doing because you built around it, it just made your deck insanely powerful. This was especially true of Karuga, the black-red one, the blue-white one. That one was the one, in the set review, I was like, there's no way playing this many extra cards in your deck is the right thing to do with Yorion, right? But it was. That's how crazy powerful these ended up being in Limited. And so building around them was a lot of fun. But the people who, we didn't have 17 lands at the time. It's going to be interesting if they ever analyze it like on a flashback. But I would guess that people who have a companion, in their deck as a companion, they probably have a way higher win percentage than basically anybody else in the format who's not in the cycling deck, which was also kind of busted, part of the problem. There was a lack of balance, but these companions were really fun to build around. And I have fond memories of it, even though I also have bad memories of it because of how, if you didn't get a companion, you really felt like you were at a disadvantage. Companions, broadly, really sweet build-arounds. And before Companion got nerfed, they were definitely way too powerful. At number 2, I've got Spiderspawning. This is another one from Innistrad. Again, this isn't the same Innistrad that had Crawling Sensation in it. But Innistrad always has a self-mill theme. And that was definitely there in original Innistrad too. And Spiderspawning was an insane payoff for milling yourself. And because Spiderspawning itself has flashback, you could build a deck there were so many good ways to mill yourself that looked like they would be terrible in most formats, that you could just play and mill yourself and get value. And then eventually you cast Spiderspawning either from your hand, or you didn't even have to worry about it getting milled because you could cast it from your graveyard. And then you cast it from your graveyard and you make this massive board filled with like 10 spiders. And they're just 1/2s with reach, but there's just so many of them that your opponent, it was very hard to beat a Spiderspawning deck. They just made too many bodies that could block everything, and they can, of course, attack reasonably well, too. If they were casting it from their hand and then they flashed it back, you were really out of luck. But what really made it strong is that it had flashback itself, so it wasn't a disaster if it got milled. Self-mill strategies and Limited, I guess. I have a few of them in this video, a few cards that are about that. And I guess I like graveyard build-arounds. Hadn't really thought of it that way, but there are a few of them on this list. And I think Spiderspawning, of all of the graveyard build-arounds you've ever seen, is the best one. All right, and at number 1, I have one that I think is underappreciated. Some of these that I've mentioned, I think you'll find on a lot of players' lists. This is one you don't see as much. Furnace Celebration. This is from Scars of Mirrodin. This is another set that actually came out when I wasn't playing, but I got to play with it on flashback drafts and stuff on Magic Online, and I know I have an old draft of me drafting a Furnace Celebration deck that I'll have put in the comments, and maybe it's on the iCards too, hopefully. Furnace Celebration is kind of insane. Every time you sack a permanent, you can pay 2 generic, and if you do, you do 2 damage to any target. That doesn't seem amazing, and it wouldn't be in a lot of formats because you have this problem of usually to sacrifice something, first of all, you have to give up some resource, and usually you have to use mana to sacrifice the thing too, so having 2 left over isn't that easy. However, this set had spell bombs in it, and it had a cycle of 5 at common. And if you got Furnace Celebration, you could just draft every spell bomb you saw. It didn't really matter whether you could pay the colored mana to also draw a card. Obviously, if you could, that was great. But you could grab all 5 spell bombs that are in, various colors because their sacrifice effect doesn't cost any colored mana. So you suddenly turn all of these spell bombs into shock plus some other effect, and maybe you're drawing a card too. And this was a very legitimate way to win games in this format. There was other sacrifice stuff going on too, but it was the spell bombs that really could make this card into an insane value engine because, again, they were at common. they weren't that good, mostly. Like, if you weren't in the Furnace Celebration deck, they were, they ranged from medium to bad. But if you had Furnace Celebration, you could go crazy. And like I said, I know there's an old draft video of me doing this one, and I'll have put it in the description. So check that out if you want to see Furnace Celebration go off. So those are my picks for the 10 biggest limited build-arounds that we've ever seen. And obviously, I also mean uncommon ones. There's some crazier ones at higher rarities. I mean, uncommon and common. And build-arounds are fun, man. And again, I think that is something that was really lacking from Capenna. They needed to have one that was fun because that's part of the format's problem is it's not that fun. Even if you're winning, you're usually doing it in a way that's kind of miserable for your opponent. So yeah, we're not going to do a new Capenna Crack-a-Pack. We've done enough. I still have draft videos and stuff going up with the format too if you want to see more of that. So check that out. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like it and share it. I do now have a channel membership available. If you want to check that out, you get some perks and you support me directly. If you click on join down below this video, you can do that. I've also got some merch. I have a new logo you may have noticed. And if you're looking for some Nizzanotes Magic shirts, right now they are available. And you can find a link to that in the description too. Planning on rolling out more of that depending on how the first wave of this merch does. So yeah. All right, so that'll do it for this video. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you all in the next one.